Good evening and welcome to Gibson's Bookstore Remote. I am Elizabeth, the events coordinator from Gibson's Bookstore, and we are joined this evening by two fantasy authors. We are here to celebrate Terry Brooks and his newest book, the Last Druid, the fourth book in the Fall of Shannara series, which is, you say, the last book in the Shannara saga entirely. Terry Brooks is someone that we have had several times in the store. This book is about 40 years in the making, and we just absolutely adore him. He is joined this evening by Robert V.S. Redick, whose most recent epic fantasy, Master Assassins, was a finalist for the 2018 Book Nest Award for Best Fantasy Novel. We have also had him in the store, and we're pleased to have him join us virtually. A couple notes to our attendees. Let's see. There is a chat sidebar and a Q&A function if you would like to type in and talk to our authors. We will be answering the questions at the end of the event, so don't panic if we don't ask your question in the beginning or middle. If you would like to, go over to the chat sidebar and make sure that you select all panelists and attendees. Otherwise, you're just kind of shouting at me. And shall we begin? These books are available from Gibson's Bookstore. We do have signed copies of yours, Terry, which we're very excited to have been able to get, considering that you are not going on a signing tour. Robert, take it away.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. And I'm just thrilled to be here. I'm deeply honored. And I want to acknowledge a couple of debts straight off the bat here. I guess first, a sort of lifelong debt to Terry as I see it, because I've been reading Terry just about as long as I've been reading. Slight exaggeration, but I think I was 11 when I picked up the Sword of Shannara, and I have no doubt whatsoever that that book changed me as a reader, and the imprint that it's left on my imagination, I can't overstate. I think that as the books kept emerging, there was no point where the sort of tornado of creativity that is the Shannara world was not there in my mind, and I know that in so many ways, not just in my writing life, I am indebted to Terry forever. And then, you know, more personally, Terry, you were the first working writer to read my debut, The Red Wolf Conspiracy, all those years ago, and you praised it very strongly, and I know you meant it, of course, but you didn't have to read it. You know, you didn't have to give that book a glance or a chance, you know, but you did, and it's made so much difference to me. The shot in the arm of my confidence was the biggest of all, but I know that you have also brought me into the awareness of so many people, and that's still happening tonight even. I'm sure it's happening, so thank you so much for that. I'd like to believe
no thanks are
I'd like
needed.
to believe. Go ahead, sir.
I was going to say no thanks are needed, because as writers, the opportunity to introduce readers to new writers is one I'm looking for all the time. And I think that's part of what our obligation as old seasoned writers is to do, is to help find new writers and to give them an audience to the extent that we're able to do so by sharing what they're doing. I still remember reading The Red Wolf Conspiracy. What was The Rats in the Ruling Sea?
That was number 2. Yeah.
That was number 2. And The Voyage of Chathran.
Well, yeah, so that's the series title, but then there was, the River of Shadows, and it
River of Shadows. Yeah. It was a great series. I didn't have much trouble saying, you know, I suppose I could tell you that in retrospect, I wish I hadn't given it any praise. But the truth is, I do wish. And I'm glad I did, because I really, really enjoyed that series. So it was kind of a no-brainer. And you're about 5 minutes from Gibson's books, I think. So I thought this was sort of a natural fit, that if you came out and chatted with me a little bit, it would feel like old home week, because we were together the last time I was out that way. And
that's right, yeah.
I miss my friends. I miss people I know.
Oh, yeah. Isn't the whole world suffering from that right now?
Oh, God, yeah.
But at least right here, we don't have to have masks on. But
Well,
anyway, yeah, I'd like to believe that I would have learned that lesson of giving back and supporting other writers as thoroughly as I have from your example, but who knows? So I'm grateful for that too. I have ever since redoubled my efforts to bring writers to the attention of the world when I enjoy them, and just to help out wherever I can. So.
yeah.
So, oh my gosh, this is, of all the times we've sat down, well, okay. I did once or twice get to actually just have dinner with you, Judine, and my partner, Kieran. But most
Right.
of the time, it's been a great big table in a great
Yes.
noisy restaurant in the middle of
Yeah.
the World Fantasy Convention or something of the kind.
Yes.
Now I have you right here and I can pose questions, and there's few, if any, distractions. But
No distractions.
I think that I'll start with the simplest, if I may, or at least it's the simplest one to ask, maybe not to answer. But how is this feeling, this moment? I mean, you have completed this mega cycle, 43 years, and it's 30 books exactly. Am I right?
I think that's right.
Yeah.
In the Shannara series, I think it is 30 books, if you count the compendium. I'll tell you how I feel is I'm torn between feeling as a nostalgia for what I've decided to finish, coupled with a fear that I have made a huge mistake by deciding that this is the spot to end it. And on the other hand, knowing for a fact that there are so many people out there that are grateful that I finally stopped writing these books. I don't know. When I first made the decision, and at the beginning of Fall of Paranor, I was all in on getting out. I figured it was time to quit. That if ever I was going to wrap it up, I should do it now while I was still a compos mentis, and before some dreadful disease set in to stop me from finishing it. And it got finished, as I'm always saying, by Brandon Sanderson. So I'm kidding about that all the time. They got to come in and finish my series, Brandon. Anyway,
I thought you were going to say Brian Herbert.
no, well, Brian, but he's too slow. So I felt like then as it went along, I was still more convinced. But when I got to writing that last book and I came to the end of it, he wrote that last sentence, that last paragraph. I said, "Are you making a huge mistake here? It's still not too late, But I just felt like I should cut it off here, not go forward no matter what. And if I choose later to write some of these books and come back into the gaps that exist all through the series, I could still do it with some sense of pride in not having betrayed my decision to not go any further. But mostly I just wanted to do some new stuff. I'm excited about new projects, and I have a whole bunch of things on the board that I want to do, and dwindling amounts of time now that I'm going to be allowed to do this. So I want to take advantage of it as much as I can to spread my wings a little bit, spread those artistic wings.
Well, you did step away a bit, right? I mean, we got some real surprises of Street Freaks,
Yeah.
And I guess your style also told me it was Terry Brooks, but if your name hadn't been on there, that would have been a startling change and a wonderful change.
Well, I've always written.
So that was before you decided you had to come back and wrap this up sooner rather than later, right?
I just felt like I've always written fantasy. I got this idea for this story, and it did not fit in the fantasy mold. It needed to be essentially futuristic, because I don't know any science, so it's difficult for me to say I'm writing science fiction. So I'm writing futuristic adventure story. And when I wrote it, I was pretty, I knew the chances of getting it sold or published were not great, because my publishing house right away said, "We're not interested in this. We want you to stick with fantasy." So I said, "Oh, okay."
I didn't know that.
You didn't? Oh yeah,
No.
they felt it wasn't in the Brooks mode, and I wanted to publish it, so I let Sean do it with Grimo Press. We entered into an agreement to get it down there, and it sold all right. But it didn't sell great, but I didn't care, because this was a case of exercising your artistic muscles a little bit and doing something that appealed to you at a time when you needed a break. And believe me, at that point, I was just about to go out screaming into the night. So I get away from Shannara, write something else. And I'd use that gimmick, if you will, all along during the series, because once you committed to, after the first 3, and I committed to doing those 4 heritage books, I said, you know, I'm in all the way now. And I'm going to have to write these books until readers stop, you know, being interested and the book stops selling. So this could go on. And at that point, I decided I was going to do the generation skipping thing on a permanent basis, and that I would write other books, Magic Kingdom, hence Magic Kingdom, and Word and Void, and doing the 2 novelizations of Hook and Phantom Menace, just were all breaks to get me away from being, you know, my head exploding over too much Shannara. And it worked. I think it worked pretty well. I've been pretty happy with that.
Do you, now with The Last Druid written, is there any feeling of exile, if that makes any sense, you know, from Shannara, from the land, or from the forelands?
No, you
No,
know,
I felt that. That's why I asked. You know, I mean, my books, my series, the Chatharn book, is so much shorter than yours. You know, they're 4 big, thick bricks, but there are only 4 of them. Yeah, but there's just 4, and I knew the 4th one was an ending, probably the ending, and there was this sort of a panic attack in a way. You know, wait, what if I don't get to live here anymore? What if I don't get to walk with these people that I've come to know like my family?
like those rats.
Yeah. But I wondered if there was any kind of protection from that with you because of the generation skipping, you know?
Yeah, there was some protection there, but there was also protection because I experienced that after I dropped out with the first 3 books, and I went to Lester and said, I cannot do any more Shannara books. I'm done. You know, I can't. And he says, all right, we'll write something else, you know. And then we got into Magic Kingdom. And so I wrote 3 of those. And by then, writing those, I was ready to get back into Shannara. I felt sort of reborn, and I had to shut myself off. But by that point, you know, I was, what was I, 40, maybe, something like that. So I had a lot of time left, and I didn't feel any pressure. Now I feel, you know, I feel like if I never write another Shannara book, I won't have lost anything. You know, I've done it, and it's time to let go of it. And I feel like I've done all the things I wanted to do. I'm not walking away with any fresh ideas still on the drawing board, or plans that never got realized, although the opportunity is there. But I just felt like, okay, this is enough. You know, this isn't enough of these books. You've done all you can. Nobody else to speak of has done this outside of the mystery field and Piers Anthony, I guess. So I figured, well, heck, I can walk away from this now and do some other things. And here's what's funny. It must be an
exciting moment. Go ahead.
I'll tell you this because I've been talking about it a lot. After I finished, it's been 2 years since I finished The Last Druid, right?
Okay.
Put it to bed, you know, expecting it to come out this past spring. So my editor, Ann Grohl, says, what are you going to write now? And I said, well, I'm working on a new book. I kind of like it. I'm excited about it. It's got some political aspects, but I think it's, you know, and it's a fantasy, but it's a different kind of fantasy. And so I wrote it and I turned it in with a certain degree of misgiving. And she came back and she said, this book has troubles that need to be addressed. So she sent me a list of them, and indeed, I think it was something like 50 pages of troubles. So I read it through, and I started to make the changes, and finally I said, you know, I called her up and I said, Ann, I don't know, I don't feel good about this. And she said, well, put it aside. I'll write some more things up on it. And I said, oh, good. So I did. And about that time is when COVID hit. And when COVID hit, here I am. I'm trapped in the house, sheltering in place and being good, and not getting to travel the world anymore, not getting to go on tour, not getting to, you know, interact with people or take vacations or anything. I'm just here all the time. Well, you know, this is what writers do anyway. So, okay, I can live with that. But what am I doing? I'm not writing anything. So I decided I'm going to write something. That's what I'm going to do. And so I sat down and I thought about it. And I said, I want to write a book that people cannot put down. Not because the end of each chapter is you have to read what happens to the next chapter, but because it's going to go like a freight train right down your gullet. So I did, and I sat down and I thought, all right, and my first sentence in that book was, they broke out of the prison at midnight, just as they planned. I thought,
oh, I'm already there.
And I thought, okay,
yep.
So, the questions are, who is they? Who is the narrator? Why are they in prison? What sort of prison is this? Where are they going to try to escape to and why? It sets up so much right off the bat. And then, well, I can't tell you anything more. That's all I can tell you.
No.
It's a book. But anyway, I wrote it in 4 months. Because
yeah, I understand that.
I wrote it in a white hot fever, and I went through it and I finished it and I sent it to my agent. I gave it to Judine first, and she said, "This book is great." And I said, "Yes, yes," because I believe my wife. And then I sent it to my agent, and she loved it. And I sent it to Anne Grohl, and she says, "We're going to yank the other book, and this is going to be your first book after the Fall of Shannara." We think it's good enough that it is a worthy successor to readers who are wondering what you're going to do next. Now, can you write another? Naturally. So I said,
4 months.
Sure, I can write another. So that's
I really hope my editor's not watching this, because I've been locked in. I've been through this same lockdown that you have.
Yeah.
And I felt like I achieved something just by revising a book in this period. I did not write a new one in 4 months.
I mean, between surviving the COVID demands on our lives, surviving this election and this election year, which has me, if I get one more political announcement, I'm going to hunt the person down and shove it down their throat, because I'm just burned out and I don't want to see anymore. I don't want to hear anymore. I want this settled, and I want it to go the way I want it to go, and that's all that needs to happen.
Let it be so.
Yes, let it be so. So that's really it. And you must have been writing. Haven't you been doing any writing?
I have, yes. Short stories for the first time in a long time, but that's sort of therapy more than where is this going to get published and what's it going to do for my career. But the sequel to Master Assassins is the front burner project is Sidewinders, which is the sequel to Master Assassins, and it comes out on May 4th. And it's done. It's out of my hands at last, and that's a great feeling.
Yeah. Well, I think, I haven't written anything without a plan. I don't know for how long, a long time. Mm-hmm. And so to write this book with no plan and just saying, I'm going to try it. I'm going to write the first chapter. And right away I knew next chapter should be this, and so on. And I never stopped to do much with the outline except to think a little bit about who the characters are going to be later on, or what the resolution is. I knew what the resolution was going to be, but I just had to make it work, because there's a lot of nobody appears as who they appear to be. There are secrets everywhere, because these are families, and we know that all families have secrets, and some of them are pretty deep and dark. And it was a first contact story. Only the first contact is between humans and Fae.
Yes.
I like I said, I just felt good about this book all the way through, and I never doubted what it needed to be. And so, of course, now I'm in edit hell with Anne, but still, it's going to turn out the way it needs to. And it was nothing like no drifting around like it was with the other book. So anyway, here I am, not talking about Shannara at all, because I've moved, I really moved beyond it is the problem. I've been gone for so long. It's 2 years since I turned it in and did the edits on it. So here we are, 2 years later and 2 books later, and it's hard to spend time even thinking about it. So I don't know.
Well, I know that the audience has Shannara questions galore. So I hope you remember what you do and don't want to give away when those start. But,
yeah, all right.
And I have Shannara questions. I have so many questions. I have 3 hours of questions here. But you touched on something that I'm curious about, because I'm a craft guy. I teach, and I've just been I've been so fascinated my whole life with the process of writing and how people do this magic. And there's so many different ways we all do it, right? But I heard an interview with you a few days ago when I was getting ready for this one, where you spoke about how in the beginning of your writing life, in the first Shannara books anyway, in the first few, you were very, very, very planned. And that gradually, as the books went on, you began to let go of that more rigid planning and schematic and trust in a more of an organic process. Do I have that right?
Yes, you do have it right. The thing is that if you can think back far enough in time, when I was growing up in elementary, high school, and college, there were no fiction writing courses at all. So I knew nothing except what I had taught myself by reading books and experimenting and the things that you do. There were no conventions. There were no science fiction cons. There were, I didn't know any authors or anybody in publishing. I was working in a vacuum. And so I wrote that first book, and when after it got accepted, Lester started saying, he said, you need to outline the next book because you are showing signs of cracking around the edges here. So try to think it through better, right? So I did. Those next 2-3 books, I was pretty rigid about putting stuff down and where am I going? What am I doing? Who are the characters? All this. I still do it, but I do it in my head more now. That's the biggest difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was also thinking about that pretty famous working relationship you had with Lester Del Rey. And, I've heard about those back and forth exchanges where he would, you'd have a couple pages come back to you, and then you'd have a big scrawl of his comments, and then a couple more pages and another big scrawl.
Yeah.
Was there, you've been very open about how much he just sank his jaws into the first manuscript of the Sword of Shannara. Was there a pattern to the issues he was redlining in your first books that you remember? Something he wanted to iron out of you or force out of you? Or?
Oh, well, yeah. He felt it was entirely too Tolkien-esque, and he's right, it was. And so especially the first part of the book was, I was still operating under the beginning writer principle. I hadn't written anything. So, other than I'd started a lot of stuff, but I didn't really write anything. So he said, I want you to move away from the first part of the story, rewrite much of it, so on. And he made me rewrite almost all of it. Second part of the book, after they meet Panama and Creole, becomes very different. And so that part of it, I was able to go a little bit more. He wanted things to make sense. He wanted things to play out in a way that made sense. He felt like his audience he was clear on who the audience was. And he said, the audiences are going to be looking for certain things. This is a Tolkien-esque epic story. They look for those tropes. They're going to want to see them in this story. So you can't do things like, first thing I did that was really cool is I killed off half the cast, And he said, no, you just can't kill people willy-nilly. You can kill a few. I'll tell you who you can kill and who you can't. And the rest of it, you have to let go of that bloodthirsty attitude of yours. Once upon a time, I'd gotten a comment on something I'd written that said, you need to embellish your background in the story about your characters. We need to know more about what does it look and feel like around there, that sort of thing. And I said, okay, well, so he wrote back after, I think it may have been in the second Shannara, he says, this is what he did. He took the page and he put a big red X on it. And he says, if you write one more goddamn weather report, I'm dropping you. He did. And I thought, well, maybe I shouldn't be writing these weather reports. As he called them.
Mark.
He was tough. He was very tough. And his argument, once upon a time, after he rejected my second book, and I thought, he's got to be wrong. I sold several million books. How can I possibly have written a bad second book? He's just crazy. So I waited for a response to my, are you sure about this type of letter? And I got a phone call from Judy Lynn, and Judy Lynn calls up and says, Brooks, how you doing? I said, she always called me Brooks. I said, great, Judy Lynn, just great. I'm ready to go put my head in the toilet and flush. And she said, well, she says, Lester sent you that manuscript back with yellow pages. Read them through, think calmly, weigh it, put it in balance, and you'll see that he's not just whistling in the dark. Because, listen, Terry, Lester is always right. That was that was the mantra. And I thought, well, if she's the head of the company, if she says he's head of their editorial department, rather, she says he's always right, I guess he must be. Who am I to argue? I didn't know anything anyway. So, I went with it. And it was only after about 8 books I started to feel really confident about myself as a writer and have a sense that I knew where I was going. And by then, Lester was gone. And so both of them were gone, actually. By then, she died the same year Magic Kingdom came out, and he passed away in, I think, 93. So I was on my own for a while. I didn't have an agent. I didn't get an agent till 97 or 98, something like that. So I was kind of flying under the radar there with a lot of things. But by then, I'd established a presence that was strong enough I could, pretty well get myself in enough trouble that when I finally got an agent, they said, first thing we're going to do is rewrite those contracts you agreed to. Oh, God.
He was, by the time I joined the Del Rey family, so to speak, he was very much gone, but he was sort of a legend around there. And
yeah, he was.
And I've read some of your comments on what he was like, and other people's too. I mean, I know that you've spoken of his really, really sharp business acumen.
Yeah.
And also just how quirky and unusual a guy he could be. I mean, talking to stuffed animals and believing that there was a sort of a fantasy intervention in his life, right?
He lived it. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you feel like
yeah.
Do you feel like big editors today are sort of forced to be, I don't know, more conventional, less idiosyncratic than back then? Are those big personalities kind of massaged down into a more manageable
I think over the course of time, they have replaced most of those people with more complacent people. I think, probably not entirely. But what I do know is that the hierarchy within the publishing house has changed dramatically since I started out. When I started out in the late 70s, the editors ran the show. They made all the decisions, and at least in Ron Bush was the head of Valentine Del Rey at that point. And I remember I had dinner with him a couple times, and during one of those conversations, he said something I'd heard before, that when, as far as Del Rey was concerned, Judy Lynn told him what she wanted to do, and he said, just do it. He never tried to tell her what to do. And when Lester, he just didn't even, he thought, no way, because they trusted them sufficiently to make the right choices. Because at that time, Del Rey was, riding the crest of the wave of fantasy that was just beginning to take hold. And Tor hadn't really come in the same way at that point, and any of the others. So it was quite different. But boy, I'll tell you, those editors, they took the time with you. I had them, I mean, can you imagine writing a book like Sword and then writing one he didn't like, and then he took 5 years between those books to do the next one and never blinked. And I thought,
yeah,
that would never happen today. You'd be out the door.
No, yeah.
Well,
so we live in fear, those of us who don't write very quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean.
Well, speaking of cresting waves, sorry, go ahead, Terry.
No, that's all right, I'm done.
No, I was going to say, speaking of cresting waves, I can see in the corner of my screen how the questions are piling up so fast, and I want to be sure to ask one more that I've always wanted to ask you.
Okay.
Let's just suppose that many emerging writers out there don't have a figure like a Lester Del Rey working with them, with that big figure who, for better or worse, is a powerful presence as they hone their craft. I've always wanted to ask you, what advice would you give emerging writers when they're looking for feedback? When they're, if they don't have an editor out there who's ready to just tell them this is what you need, and they have to find it privately, who should they look for in a reader, and what should they look for in a reader?
That's very tough. I don't know because I haven't had to face this question for 40 some years. My feeling is that the first thing you need to do is find one or two people who you trust implicitly to judge your material and form a little, either a list of of your reviewers or a little book club or something of that sort. But you need to have somebody you trust to tell you when something doesn't make sense or doesn't seem to be working for them, rather than it be your mother who says, this is so wonderful, honey, such good work. You don't want that. So you have to do that. And I think you can go to the conventions and you can go to the science fiction conventions and the Comic Cons and all that and sit in and listen to what writers have to say. If writers have things to say that are positive, that are teaching moments, listen to them. They know. If they gripe, ignore them. I sat through, I don't know how many times with writers telling me how they were screwed off by the publisher and they were mistreated. One of them was quite famous. And I just said, finally, why don't you just shut up? Because you're not sitting in the catbird seat and trying to tell people that you've been worked over. No one's going to believe that. So, you have to get the help where you can find it. But those are people you can pretty much depend upon, I think. And beyond that, if you find anybody in publishing or you've got a chance to go show your material, you do it. You go do it. And when you do find an agent or you do find an editor, you need to find somebody who you can form a friendship with. I don't care what anybody says. I don't care how many people are willing to say, if that's not important, this is a business. I know this, but believe me, your life will be a whole lot easier if you like your editor or you like your agent. And I have many people I could point to who could say, yes, God bless you, Terry, for saying this.
That sure rings true with my life so far too. Yeah. I mean,
we've all had our ups and downs along the way, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've really been blessed. I've liked all the people that I've worked with professionally. I am on my second agent. I parted ways with my first one, but not. It was a mutual decision, and it was one where we remained quite close. And
that's very good.
I love my new agent, and I've had a couple editors retire, but they've all been gems. So I've been really lucky there. But
yeah, I've had four editors. Four editors in 40 years, which I figure is pretty good. I get about 10 years out of the editor, and then they give up.
We had the same in Betsy Mitchell for a while.
Yes, we did, and Betsy was great, and she's running her own shop now and doing editing work for people who have some cash around that they want to spend on it, and she is super. She's so good at that. She did Street Freaks, actually. She edited Street Freaks.
Oh, okay.
She did, and she's done several books for Sean and some other people we've sent over her way, too, and Betsy is terrific.
And she'd be one answer to that question I posed in a way. That sort of person, if you do have some money set aside for this, and you can research it, I guess you can hire that kind of person, but you sure have to research it first.
Okay. Oh, there's a familiar face.
I'm back. We're about ready to start answering audience questions. Unless, Robert, did you have one last question you wanted to ask before we begin?
No, let's give the audience plenty of time here. And I'll still be around so I can editorialize.
Don't leave.
Don't leave.
No.
We're not done talking.
We haven't actually, Robert, you have a book coming out in May, and do you want to give the elevator pitch for that one?
Oh, wow. Well, I do, but I don't have one, so here goes in 30 seconds. So it's Sidewinders, which comes out in May, is the sequel to Master Assassins, which came out in 2018. Master Assassins is the story of two village boys who are not assassins, master or otherwise. They are just really unlucky and mistaken for assassins by just about everyone in the world. And they get on the wrong side of their people's queen and prophet and have to flee for their lives from her death squads. The first book is this horrible escape from her army and her mad religious war. The second book, Sidewinders, expands the canvas immensely. So we still have the brothers at the center. They're still on the run, but we also find out that this world that they're fleeing through is at the center of a huge macro political feud that involves, a worldwide plague. And yes, I wrote all this and planned this before COVID-19.
Wow.
But yeah, I'm not sure I would have chosen to write about plagues if I knew what was coming, but I'm in the thick of it.
Well,
So that's it. It's about
It's all about
fanaticism and
timing.
the nature of genius and plagues and desert adventure, and I'm having the time of my life.
you know, fantasy is supposed to be escapism, Robert.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, Terry's not sparing us from thinking about the big issues in the world either. He
Yeah.
just transforms them in miraculous ways.
And oftentimes, reading fantasy is sometimes how we process the events going on in our lives.
That's
Well,
right.
I've always said that I write fantasy that imitates life, because that's my impetus. That's where I get all my ideas from, is the newspapers, usually headlines that have me pulling my hair out, usually from people who are of the ilk that I wish to drop them over the nearest cliff. But these are the moral questions that we face as human beings every day. Everybody can identify with them, and that's what drives my interest in any kind of a question that I use in doing any of the Shannara books or any of the Magic Kingdom books and so forth.
So let's jump into some audience questions here. I will remind our audience members that Gibson's Bookstore does have signed copies of The Last Druid. We also have Robert's books, which we would be happy to send out if you choose to order them. And we do have a handful of signed book plates left from Terry Brooks to include with purchases of his other books from Gibson's. Let's jump into this first question here. Joe wants to know, who's going to ask where the sword ended up? And then Colin wants to know, would you consider this final novel your scouring of the Shire?
That's pretty grim. I don't know that I would call it the scouring of the Shire necessarily, but it definitely is the foreseeable end. If I drop dead tomorrow, I'm happy. Well, I'm not happy about dropping dead, but I mean, I'm happy with the way the books turned out. I don't know what happened to the sword. It's a good question. I've lost track of it. It's around somewhere. Probably in Paranor somewhere or whatever.
That feeds, you don't know where it is. Okay. That feeds into a question for each
Ask
of you.
Sean. Yes.
For each of you, when you, do you plan for plotting out a whole series, or do you write them one at a time? And if you do, how do you shoehorn in new ideas when you're editing pieces in that you might not have laid the groundwork for in the first book?
I already answered this. Your turn.
Are you sure you don't want to give it another crack first?
Well, all I would say is what I've said before, that I changed my habits, and I now work in a more organic fashion. I try not to be too dogmatic in the way I put stories together. I let inspiration interfere with my life and make me turn the other direction, but I'm also very careful not to jump off a cliff by doing it and write myself into a corner. That's about
And
it.
I guess I use the metaphor I keep coming back to is, I make a triptych for myself. I know that, I'm trying to drive to Seattle, let's say, but so I'll plan, and I know even as I'm making the plan that I'm going to go off on the side roads and the gravel roads to get there, because they're just going to be much more interesting. And that doesn't mean that you don't eventually get back on the highway and you forget that you're trying to reach Seattle. But it does mean, time and time again, you've got an idea for what should happen next, and you come to a fork in the road. And over here is where you've got your beautifully thought out, elegant, efficient plan. And over here is this wild, new, wonderful idea. And it's not always so simple to say, well, I'm just going to go with the wild idea because it might wreck the whole thing. You might go over a cliff, like Terry said. But it might be just that moment where the energy you've been searching for comes roaring into the book. So sometimes it is good to make the detour. So I plan, but I never really feel a prisoner of that plan, I guess.
I don't think that writers work the way that question suggests. We don't sit down and follow the paint by the numbers approach to writing a story. That excludes any creativity to the project other than fitting the words together. You are going to have new ideas, whether you want them or not, as you write. You are going to come up with better ideas different ideas, new characters, things like that. And you have to allow the space to fit them into the story if they serve a purpose that you think helps to advance the story. So all that factors in, I think, too.
And it just gets pretty dull to execute, you know, point by point something you've thought out in advance. When you're actually doing the writing, it can get pretty dull if you do that.
Yvonne asks, what order would you recommend new readers to follow when exploring the Shannara world? And Jeffrey wants to know, do you have any plans to connect Word and the Void to Shannara?
Well, I've always been stumped by that question about where do you start. These are generation skipping stories. It doesn't really matter where you start because you can always go back and read what came before, and you won't be, you know, because you're reading about different characters with every set of books that you read. First of all, you should read the first book in any of the groups. That would be a good start, although some people don't, and they always seem to be not bothered by that, but I would be. So read the first book or read any of the first three. That would work out and no problem. And as far as the Word and Void, there are references in Word and Void that suggest that what happened to the world during the Great Wars was what happens in Genesis of Shannara, same thing. So that suggestion is very strong. And I just left it out there, and people, but they're different, you know, they're different series, and they really aren't connected except by nuance and suggestion. So I'm hesitant to say that they are connected in any meaningful way. So I would say, you know, treat them differently.
All right. Galen asks, who is your favorite druid and why? And which Olmsford story is your favorite?
Galen, listen to me carefully. You have asked the question that no one is allowed to have an answer to, because when I answer that question, you're making me choose between my children, and I will not do that. So I would say each of these books, each of these characters serves a purpose, and I love each of them, even the bad guys, for, you know, certain aspects of the story or what I went through to write that particular character or tell that particular story. And it's all about that rather than saying, well, a particular character. And it doesn't matter because your favorite characters are your favorite characters, right? If Robert and I started talking about favorite characters, we'd probably choose different people altogether, because that's what you do. When you read a book, it's yours. The story is yours, and you get to make those decisions for yourself. And there is no right or wrong to that.
I remember, Terry, you talking about how every story, every written story at least, is sort of an equation with the writer on one side, the reader on the other, and the relationship between them is a complex function. But if you get it right, that's when life roars into your story and everyone's happy, right?
I think that's right. I do believe that.
Dave wonders, where do you get your inspiration for all the interesting characters like the demons and the forbidding?
Well, I keep a stack of bills on my desk, and I look over there and I see demons all over the place. The IRS likes contacting me regularly, more there. Political advertisements, a lot of demons out there. So, you know, life provides them. I just look for characteristics. I don't really know any demons, you know, I really don't. I don't know personally any demons, but I see them as evidenced by the behavior of all kinds of people, which is very troubling to me. And so I want to understand it, and that's why I write about it. Is when I'm writing about, you know, the really dark creatures, I'm writing about what I see in this world. And to me, that's very scary. Nothing scares me more than that. I don't believe in things that go bump in the night. I believe things that go bump right up against my door.
Robert, what about you? What is your inspiration for some of your characters?
Oh, so many things. I mean, I'm a magpie where inspiration comes. I mean, certainly from my reading life, but also from my family life. You know, I come from Virginia, and you know, I have a lot of roots in Appalachia, and both the mountain folks in my family and the sort of more well-heeled Virginia Piedmont people were all just storytellers, and there's, you know, it's far, far more important to entertain than it is to be factually true.
For
So
a minute,
much so.
I thought you were saying that your inspiration for where the demons in your stories come from are inspired by your family.
My family, I thought that too. I was waiting for it more.
Yes.
That was very brave.
Sure.
Robert, we are recording,
the demons.
so.
The demons and the angels are right there. They're in my blood, that's for sure. Yeah.
You know, I get a lot from reading other writers, but not in my own field. I've said several times that one of my major influences when I was kind of settling in on being a writer was William Faulkner. And for me, seeing the way in which the Snopes, who were the trailer trash people, interacted with the Compsons, who were the landed gentry, the one trying to take down the other so that the wealth could be theirs all the time in all kinds of really horrible ways. That's the kind of inspiration I take, because these people were created because these people exist. And that's where I'm always looking, you know, if I'm creating something that isn't just all monster, but it has some sense of humanity about them, some semblance at least, then I'm looking to what I see around me and what I've read, and usually from, well, all kinds. I do a lot of reading in literature, regular contemporary fiction, a lot of reading in other areas that suggest things to me about the way the world works that I find, but lots of nonfiction too, for that matter.
You know, when you told me some years ago how much Faulkner meant to you, I think I almost like choked on my martini or whatever I had in my hand at the moment. Because at first I was like, you know, his prose style is so different. It is not Faulknerian. It's so much more straightforward.
Yes.
But then I thought about the generational aspect of your Shannara storytelling. It's like, oh yeah, you know, one could definitely see that, I guess. And
yeah, I really feel like his style was never going to be mine. And his subject matter was never going to be mine, but his approach to his characters and to the interaction and to the ways in which each of them try to defend or attack the other, that's something I can latch onto.
Mm-hmm.
Terry, we have a question here that I know you sometimes get heated about. What happened to the show?
Well, they stopped paying me any money, for one thing. I can't understand it just because it's not on anymore. You know, what happened to the show is very complicated, and all I can say is that I liked what I saw in the first season, not so much in the second season. The actors were terrific. I liked them a lot. I know a lot of people didn't think they fit the characters. I thought they worked just fine. I appreciated how much they gave to that show, and I liked them as people, which I was surprised, because I thought, you know, they're going to be a bunch of little snots when I get down there and finally meet it. But they weren't. They were great, all of them. I'm still good friends with John Rhys Davies, Manu Bennett. You know, the others I haven't communicated with for a while, but you know, if we show up, we're right back where we were the last time we met. The writers for the show were, you know, I like those guys. They didn't always do what I wanted them to, but that's just the nature of the business. So I got mixed feelings about it, but I don't regret what happened. It gave me an open door to a lot of opportunities, and I have another movie deal pending right now. I have already received interest in this new book. And so, you know, something might happen, but at the end of the day, I write books. I don't care about calendars or comics or anything else. I just don't care. I only really care about being a writer. That's the only thing I've ever wanted, and I'm really happy doing it. It makes me happy, and it makes me a comfortable living, and I don't know how much more you can expect from this life.
Honestly, that sounds like it's living the dream. And you haven't even had to really leave your house in order to do the other part of touring.
Or been able to lately.
I know, that's right. I'm living the life I live most of the time, except it's now forced. I'm kind of imprisoned here for the time being. Judina is very strict about, we do not go to restaurants, we do not go to movies, we do not go to any gathering place with people where there's more than the two of us and one other person. That's it. So, you know, I just It's a marching. There are marching orders there to write something. Write something. You know, write something. Make use of your time so you doesn't wasting it. And then in the meantime, try to have a good time playing Scrabble.
Gentlemen, talk to me about writing fight scenes. Fight scenes seem to be something that aspiring authors sometimes struggle with. How do you approach it?
You, Robert.
Me?
Yeah.
All right, I'll be brief. I approach them with dread because I know that for me that's an entirely, it's sort of like an all-consuming mode I go into. I think the last time I was in a physical altercation was 7th grade. So I'm writing about soldiers. I'm not a soldier. You know, I have military friends and family and so on, but I've just been spared all of that. So what the hell do I know about it, really? I try to one, not glorify the fighting, be as true as I can be from all the reading and thinking and honest reflection as I can, and just really try to get it right. I dread it because it stops everything else. I feel such a responsibility to try to make it become real, and you know, it's got an undeniable place in our genre in fantasy, you know, and in any adventure writing, really, right? But I think that it's very hardwired into us to pay great attention to violence or even the threat of violence. There's a reason why it's there in our stories, but I never want to do it frivolously or forget, you know, what it means to suffer in any way. I mean, I tripped over my puppy. I was telling you before we went on the air. I've lost 6 weeks of the use of this hand because I tripped over my puppy and cut myself with a shard of coffee cup. What about real injuries? They're not jokes, you know. Don't know if that answers your question.
And Terry, what about you?
Well, there's an old saying, if you want to elicit emotion from your readers, just threaten one child. Don't threaten a whole nation. Nobody cares about a whole nation, you know, in any kind of emotional way, because we can't grasp that. One person, make it personal, and every time you'll find a way to get to the emotion you're searching for. I don't mind writing fight scenes, but it's always, for me, about what's the personal aspect of this particular encounter and the outcome. And how can I wring every last drop of emotion out of the reader from that particular scene? I guess that's the way I approach it.
That sounds like pretty sound advice. Gentlemen, what's the last book you bought for the cover?
The cover? I never buy books for the cover.
Never?
Never. I mean, I'll buy it for the author's name or for a review I've read or for what? For something I read in the liner notes, maybe. I will pick a book up and look at it if the cover looks interesting. But I don't think I've ever bought a book just for the cover or even, you know, given it more than a passing glance. I'm pretty directed in that way.
I'm sure I've passed up some very good books because the cover just, you know, I'm not proud of this, saying one should do this, but I expect I've probably just moved on because the cover said to me, which is too bad, you know. And then sometimes you're really lucky and you find out that you shouldn't have turned away and you go back and have a wonderful experience. I tell you, a book I love, it's maybe 15 years old now, is Saladin Ahmed's Throne of the Crescent Moon.
Oh,
and and Saladin himself said, "Oh, that cover, I could just, you know, I could just die." So I'm not, you know, I'm not just alone here. Yeah, I looked at it and thought, "Oh, this isn't going to be much," and put it aside for years. And when I finally read it, I was, "This is just brilliant."
So much of what I'm doing now, Robert, involves reading the next book of writers that I admire a great deal as soon as it comes out, and that takes up, you know, about half my time. Much of it involves reading manuscripts sent to me by my publisher and other publishers that they think is the next great thing, and I'll read it. But if I get into it and I really love it, then I'm going to read it all the way through. And the rest of it has to do with my wife, who says to me, "You must read this book." For a while, when she did that, I said, "I don't think so. That isn't my cup of tea." because Janine reads books about small children who grow up in West Virginia with their parents in the coal mine until the cave-in takes the dad. The mother becomes an alcoholic and has other bad experiences. She grows up to 17 when she is raped and has a child, and then she dies homeless.
Yeah,
So I don't read a lot of those
family.
books. You know, she likes those books, but I don't. But what I've discovered about the ones that she recommends for me to read is that if I do it, I will discover 9 times out of 10 an amazing new writer. And I'll give you a couple of quick examples. Frederick Bachman, you know, A Man Called Ove, Beartown, and his latest one was a Disappointed People or something like that. Just an amazing writer, great skill as a writer. I'm always looking for that. M.R. Tolles, Lauren Goff, people I wouldn't necessarily read. So I want to read, I do want to read those books desperately, because those are the books that teach me something about being a writer, because these people have skills that I maybe don't have or never even thought about. And those kinds of things will serve me well when I write in the fantasy genre. So I'm pretty picky about that sort of thing, since, you know, my energy level is about 50%.
I make my students at Stone Coast read about 60% outside the fantasy genre, and they tear their hair and they, you know, stomp and swear, and then at the end of the semester they're just almost always really glad.
So let's pivot this into what is the latest book that you were really excited about. Terry, before we began the event, you were talking about The House on the Cerulean Sea.
I was talking about that, but I'm going to talk about something else. Yeah, T.J. Klune, who as a writer, I just came to, wrote a book called The House on the Cerulean Sea, which is just an amazing book. It is kind and gentle. It is also heartbreaking in many ways. It's about orphaned monsters, essentially. And the ways in which they're integrated or ignored or otherwise mistreated. He just did a great job in that book. The other book is A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. I know Naomi, full disclosure, I admire her. She is a great writer. I've read her Temeraire books, which is the Dragon series, and I read her fairy tale series as well. Which I can't think of the titles right now. But anyway, this is a departure, and it's, as I say, a quick quote to put on that book is Harry Potter on steroids.
Robert, what about you? What's a book that you have loved lately that you really want people to read?
Oh, well, let's see. I'm right now in the middle of Arkady Martin's A Memory Called Empire. And I haven't read a space opera in a long time, but if there are space operas this good, this smart, and this constantly surprising out there to be read, I think I'm converted. It's really brilliant. It's so sensitive and nuanced at one level. You are sharply aware of the charged relations between people as they cross cultures and so on. And that's a lovely thing to encounter in any book. And then she has this huge sweep as well. And it's, talk about reading writers that can show you where you could be stronger. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. And then a totally different book, not in the genre world at all, really. It's a few years old. It's called Under Majordomo Minor by Patrick Dewitt. And I've never read a Patrick Dewitt novel, but I'm completely head over heels with him and his style. He's really minimalist, but he has this understated, wonderful sense of humor as he writes about what appear to be very simple people that as they go about their daily lives, things just get crazier and crazier and crazier as, sort of a domino effect. And it all feels inevitable and natural and kind of magical at the same time. So those are two that I've loved lately.
So I think we have time. I have one more question to ask you, and I will remind people, oh, someone just popped in a better question. Now I kind of want to do that one. But all right, two more questions. Signed books are available from Gibson's Bookstore. We happily ship anywhere in the world. Jeffrey asks, if you had a chance to go back in time, what storyline would you change and why?
Oh.
Nothing. No, I think that's revisionist history. I think it's a mistake. I think Stephen King has locked into that to his detriment. I think that once you've written something, you've written it. It was your best effort at the time. To now go back and spin your wheels by trying to make it better makes no sense to me. It is what it is. Move ahead. Do something else. So I wouldn't change anything.
All right.
Somebody will read me something now that I'll say, boy, I wish I had changed that. But I can't think of anything.
All right. Well, then let's close out with, what advice would you give to aspiring writers?
The one that I always loved, I don't know if you heard this, Robert, but the one I always get is, if you can quit, do so.
Robert, what about you?
I got to pass on the advice that I was given, because so a guy who writes those legal thrillers that Terry long ago was told he should write instead of fantasy.
It's true.
I won't name him, but he's a multimillionaire. And
Yes.
I was a little kid, working on my first novel, and I went off to spend a few days at an Airbnb in the mountains, and he was there, and it was one of these places where you eat at the same table, and somehow I found out this guy is incredibly rich. He is, I don't want to be rich like him, but he must know things.
Close to be helpful.
Oh, comfortable. I'd like to be comfortable, and maybe there's something I can learn. I didn't ask him anything, but I think he could just see my eyes as I followed him around.
Like
And
sausages.
he finally, after dinner, he said, I wrote a book. I put it in an envelope. It came back rejected. I did that 52 times.
Yeah.
With the same, I revised it, but it was basically the same. The 53rd time, like 4 years into this process, somebody took it and it sold 17 million copies or something like that. And he said, I almost didn't send it out the 53rd time. And he said, just write because it's fun, because you never know what's going to happen or not happen. And then he walked out the door.
Excellent advice.
Yeah.
That's a great advice. And if you ever see Shannon Hale, who won the Newbery, I think, for when she goes on tour, she has actually laminated all of her rejection letters into into one long strip, and she has someone in the audience take one end and just keep walking. And she's like, that's how many rejection letters I got. Keep trying. And now she's very successful publishing career, but you just needed that first one.
Every writer I know has an amazing story about getting published. Some part of it involves luck, just being lucky enough to be at the right place, the right time, the right people, and so forth. And I remember when Stephen Donaldson broke in, same time I did, that his book, Lord Fowl's Bane, had been sent to 52 publishers, and he was starting, when he got picked up by Del Rey, through the second time with the same people who had rejected him. But you can see, the first time he rejected it, Del Rey Books was Ballantine Books. Now it's Del Rey Books with different people, and they had a different attitude. And that's why you never give up. If you really want to do this, you can never give up. You have to remember, you just haven't landed in the right spot at the right time yet. And just keep at it. That's what it takes. Someday I'll tell you that story.
On that note, I think that's about the end of our evening. Thank you very much, everybody joining us from home. Robert, thank you for joining us. We will probably have you in May, whether we can maybe do that in person. But if not, we'll have you virtually. And Terry, thank you for joining us again. This has been a lot of fun. You're always such a delight to have. Usually, we've had you twice in the store, and I wish we could have had you this time in the actual big store. Last time we were just in the middle of moving. We'll get you in the big store one of these days.
Yeah, life's a long time. I'll get back to you.
We will be happy to have you. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you. This is so much fun. Thanks, Terry.
Thank you, Robert. I appreciate it. It's been a great time.
That's so much fun.